Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Rege. I'm a grateful member of Alcoholics Anonymous from Coldwater, Michigan. And, grateful to be with you today. I couldn't help but notice before this meeting started that we have some newcomers here, and you are the most important people here. I'm glad you're here. And because you're here, I'm going to back up a little bit into the doctor's opinion, because it's very, very important to me to make sure that you understand what makes me an alcoholic. I don't know what makes you an alcoholic, but I definitely know what makes me an alcoholic, because I studied this book, Alcoholics Anonymous. And if you don't know what it is, it's this blue book, and it's called Alcoholics Anonymous. And this describes the disease. It describes the solution. And it tells me the program of action that keeps me out of the problem and in the solution. And it saved the life of an alcoholic like me. And if it worked for me, I promise you, it'll work for you. I've seen it work for countless others. I think the first thing I want to read to you out of the doctor's opinion is on the top of XXVIII. In the forward, it's in the, before page 1 in the big book. And it says, we believe, and so suggested a few years ago, that the action of alcohol on these chronic alcoholics is a manifestation of an allergy, that the phenomenon of craving is limited to this class and never occurs in the average temperate drinker. These allergic types can never safely use alcohol in any form at all. And once having formed the habit and found that they cannot break it, once having lost their self-confidence, their reliance upon things human, their problems pile up on them and become astonishingly difficult to solve. And believe me, that happened for me. And it says, men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. The sensation is so elusive that while they admit that it is injurious, they cannot at a time differentiate the truth from the false. To them, their alcoholic life seems the only normal one. They are restless, irritable, and discontented unless they can again experience the sense of ease and comfort, which comes at once by taking a few drinks which they see others taking with impunity. And after they have succumbed to the desire again, as so many do, and the phenomenon of craving develops, they pass through the well-known stages of a spree, emerging remorseful, with a firm resolution not to drink again. This is repeated over and over, and unless the person can experience an entire psychic change, there is very little hope of recovery. On the other hand, and as strange as this may seem to those who do not understand, once a psychic change has occurred, the very same person who seemed doomed, who had so many problems he despaired of ever solving them, suddenly finds himself easily able to control his desire for alcohol. The only effort necessary being required to follow a few simple rules. And those rules are simply the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. And there's another little part that I like to read in here, because it kind of describes so many of us. And on XXX, it goes through and describes some different types of alcoholics. And it says the classification of alcoholics seems most difficult and in much detail is outside the scope of this book. There are, of course, the psychopaths who are emotionally unstable. We are familiar with this type. They're always going on the wagon for keeps. They're over remorseful and make many resolutions, but never a decision. There is the type of man who is unwilling to admit he cannot take a drink. He plans various types of drinking. He changes his brand or his environment. There is the type who always believes that after being entirely free from alcohol for a period of time, he can take a drink without danger. There is the manic depressive type who perhaps is the least understood by his friends and about whom a whole chapter could be written. Then there are the types, well, like me, entirely normal in every respect, except in the effect alcohol has upon them. They are often able, intelligent, friendly people. All these and many others have one symptom in common. They cannot start drinking without developing the phenomenon of craving. This phenomenon, as we have suggested, may be the manifestation of an allergy, which differentiates these people and sets them apart as a distinct entity. It has never been, by any treatment with which we are familiar, permanently eradicated. The only relief we have to suggest is entire abstinence. So if I was to pick up a drink of alcohol today, I guarantee you, I promise you, that phenomenon of craving is going to kick in my body. And once that phenomenon kicks in, I'm going to have to take another drink and another drink and another drink until that phenomenon is never going to be satisfied. I'm just going to continue to drink until I pass out, basically, is what's going to happen to this alcoholic. And that's never a good thing. So my only hope is not to put that first drink in my body. But then the dangerous part of this disease kicks in, and that's the mental obsession, And we have a whole chapter about that, too. It's called More About Alcoholism. And, and that's all about that mental obsession and that peculiar mental twist and that whole thing where my keen intellectual alcoholic mind tries to tell me that somehow, someday, I'm going to be able to pick up a drink and put it in this body, and that phenomenon is not going to kick in, and that's just an outright lie. I tested that many times long before I got to Alcoholics Anonymous, and every single time that disease is lying to me. Every single time I put a drink in this body, that phenomenon of craving is developed. And once I put the first drink in me, I can never tell you how many drinks I'm going to have before I'm done. I can't tell you what's going to happen. I can't tell you where I'm going to end up. I can't tell you if I'm going to have any money left in my pocket. I can't tell you if I'm going to have any money left in my bank account. I can't tell you if my car is going to remain uncrashed. I can't tell you if I'm going to remain a free man or if I'm going to be in jail, in a hospital. I can't tell you I can't tell you if I'm going home with your wife or mine. I can't tell you what's going to happen once I put one drink in this body. That's the way it is for Rege Rupp. That's a pretty scary existence. Okay, so that's the truth. If you're a newcomer, you already know that. If you're here in this meeting, you already know that. That's the truth. If you're here, hopefully you're willing to face the truth, because until you face the truth about this disease, there's no hope for you. And that thing was talking about that psychic change. And if I go in the back of this book, and I don't know about you guys, but when I got here, I was that guy that said, hey, coach, give me the ball, give me the ball, give me the ball. Put me in the game. Tell me what I got to do. Show me. Don't tell me, show me, and I found a sponsor, and he was willing to tell me and show me. And, there's this little thing in the back of the book called spiritual experience. And that tells me what needs to happen in Rege Rupp in order for him to stay sober. So I'm going to read this to you real quick, too, so you know what needs to happen. And it says the term spiritual experience and spiritual awakening are used many times in this book, which upon careful reading shows that the personality change sufficient to bring about recovery from alcoholism has manifested itself. I've heard that word before. It sounds like that allergy, but now something else is going on. So recovery from alcoholism has manifested itself among us in many different forms. Yet it is true that our first printing gave many readers the impression that these personality changes or religious experiences must be in the nature of sudden and spectacular upheavals. Happily for everyone, this conclusion is erroneous. Excuse me. In the first few chapters, a number of sudden revolutionary changes are described. Though it was not our intention to create such an impression, many alcoholics have nevertheless concluded that in order to recover, they must acquire an immediate and overwhelming God consciousness, followed at once by a vast change in feeling and outlook. Among our rapidly growing membership of thousands of alcoholics, such transformations, though frequent, are by no means the rule. Most of our experiences are what the psychologist William James calls the educational variety because they develop slowly over a period of time. Quite often, friends of the newcomer are aware of the difference long before he is himself. He finally realizes that he has undergone a profound alteration in his reaction to life, that such a change could hardly have been brought on by himself alone. What often takes place in a few months could seldom have been accomplished by years of self-discipline. With few exceptions, our members find that they have tapped an unsuspected inner resource, which they presently identify with their own conception of a power greater than themselves. Most of us think this awareness of a power greater than ourselves is the essence of our spiritual experience. Our more religious members call it God consciousness. Most emphatically, we wish to say that any alcoholic capable of honestly facing his problems in the light of our experience can recover, provided he does not close his mind to all spiritual concepts. He can only be defeated by an attitude of intolerance or belligerent denial. We find that no one need have difficulty with the spirituality of the program. Willingness, honesty, and open-mindedness are the essentials of recovery, but these are indispensable. And then this is right where I started, because long before I got to Alcoholics Anonymous, and oh my God, my friend Karen is here. How cool. It says where Rege Rupp started is this: there is a principle which is a bar against all information, which is proof against all arguments, and which cannot fail to keep Rege Rupp in everlasting ignorance. And that principle is contempt prior to investigation. You know, and and what that told me is that last little paragraph. You know, I remember my dad driving me to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous in Florida long before I got to my very first AA meeting. And I remember I knew, you know, I kind of conceded, yep, I had a severe problem. And we pulled up to that meeting and I looked at the people outside of that meeting and I suddenly became, nope, I didn't have a problem anymore. I was no longer an alcoholic. I was not going in there. No way, no how. We drove away and I went on, I drank for many more years of misery. And I mean, it was miserable drink and there was nothing fun about it. So, you know, if I've got that physical allergy, I've got the mental obsession, I'm doomed. You know, I just told you what the solution is. So I've got to find a way to get from doomed to that solution. You know, and I'm supposed to be reading you about Bill's story. He found a way. I wonder how in the world Bill did it. So, you know, Wesley told me I was starting on page 9 here. And then I think you guys told me page 13. But if I've got an hour, I'm going to just read through some of this page 9 because it's really interesting how it developed with Bill. You know, and I'm just going to start, you know, with actually the bottom of page 8 is where he says, my musing was interrupted by the telephone. The cheery voice of an old school friend asked if he might come over. He was sober, you know, and Bill's shocked because he knew this guy was a big time drunk, just like Bill, you know, and it was years since I could remember his coming to New York in that condition. I was amazed. Rumor had it he had been committed for alcoholic insanity. And in this day and age, that means he went to the treatment center, you know, and I wondered how he had escaped. Of course, he would have dinner and then I could drink openly with him. Unmindful, of course, you know, I'm an alcoholic. I didn't think about him, Bill said, you know, unmindful of his welfare. I thought only of recapturing the spirit of other days. And there it is, you know, that word spirit. That's what I was looking for in the drink in the first place, was that spiritual connection. You know, I remember the first time I felt that, you know, when I was drinking, I was this young kid. I'm working at a marina, and these guys that own that marina were kind of my heroes. I'm 15 years old, and they had this ritual at the stroke of noon. they would gather at this refrigerator and they'd start passing out Stroh's beers. And I remember one day they turned and they looked at me and they said, "Hey, Ruppy, you want a beer?" And they tossed one to me, and my thought was, I didn't care about the beer. I just heard, "Ruppy, you want to join our gang?" And I'm thinking, these guys are my heroes. And I'm thinking, yeah, I want to join the gang. So I popped the beer. I took a drink of that thing, and it tasted awful. I was not telling them that because they're my heroes and I'm doing what they're doing. But then I got the effect, that wonderful effect of alcohol, that warm feeling, that spiritual. I started feeling that spiritual connection to these guys, my heroes. And all of a sudden, I felt like I was supposed to feel my entire life. I thought, my God, this is it. After having a beer or two, I'm like, wow, now I get what these guys like about this stuff. Now I understand why they have that little gleam in their eye, that little sparkle and the way they talk to each other. And I get it now. And I felt that warm glow and I felt that spiritual connection. And I thought, wow, this is awesome. I can't wait to do this again. And I hated the taste of that stuff, and I hated the way I felt the next day, but I couldn't wait to do it again. That's the effect of alcohol. That's the thing I was always seeking. So let me find where the heck I left off when I found that word. Let's see. So let's see. Unmindful of his welfare, I thought only of recapturing the spirit of other days. There was that time we had chartered an airplane to complete a jag. His coming was an oasis in the dreary desert of futility, the very thing, an oasis. Drinkers are like that. The door opened and there he stood, fresh-skinned and glowing. He had the spirit in another form now. He had the spirit of recovery. That's what we get here. There was something about his eyes. There's that sparkle that we had, that I saw in those guys that were drinking. He was inexplicably different. What had happened? He was really, really present. And that's the thing that I see in the eyes of people in AA. They're really, really present. They're in the moment. And that's what I saw in those guys, too, that were drinking. They were very present with each other. You could tell they were right there, right now. The stories that they were telling were right there, right then. And I loved it. I pushed a drink across the table. He refused it. Disappointed but curious, I wondered what had got into the fellow. He wasn't himself. "Come, what's this all about?" I queried. He looked straight at me. Simply but smilingly, he said, oh, my word, if they would have said this, I would have run. He said, "I got religion." Thank God I didn't hear that in my first AA meeting, or I probably would have run. But I was aghast. So that was it. Last summer, an alcoholic crackpot. Now I suspect a little cracked about religion. He was starry. He had that starry-eyed look. Yes, the old boy was on fire, all right, but bless his heart, let him rant. Besides, my gin would last longer than his preaching. But he did no ranting. In a matter-of-fact way, he told how two men had appeared in court persuading the judge to suspend his commitment. They had told of a simple religious idea and practical program of action. That was 2 months ago, and the result was self-evident. It had worked. He had come to pass his experience along to me if I cared to have it. I was shocked, but interested. Certainly, I was interested. I had to be, for I was hopeless. And I got to stop here because I'm going to tell you about my Abby Thatcher and some similarities. My Abby Thatcher, his name was Ricky Lee Mathis, and I found him. God put just the right place and just the right person in just the right place at just the right time. I was suicidal. I was in Branch County Jail. It's not more than maybe 6-7 miles from where I sit right now. It was 1992, and Ricky Lee Mathis had just spent over 20 years, over half his life in prison. He was one of the biggest, meanest, roughest, gruffest characters I had ever seen or met in my entire life. I had been, put in Branch County Jail, and after several drunk drivings, the judge, when I went in front of this judge who had lost his daughter to a drunk driver, much to my amazement, there were probably 6 or 7 drunk drivers getting sentenced right in front of me. Every one of those drunk drivers was getting probation, fines and costs, probation. And he came to me and he stopped and he said, "Mr. Rupp, I've got about 7 letters here. I've got letters from every member of your family." And he said, "Every single one of them, except for one, has told me to give you the maximum amount of time I can possibly give you to save you from you." And I'm like, and when he said that, there was just something really right about that. And I felt like I'd finally been found out. I knew I'd been living the life for so long, and I'd been dodging and ducking and weaving. And I knew it was just like a moment of truth, and it felt right, and that was the first time I felt right with the truth in a really long time. And I was ready for that, and I knew it was my only hope, because I was absolutely suicidal. And he did that. He sentenced me to the maximum amount of time he could sentence me, and that, jail door shut behind me. And I had this, I don't know why I could breathe, and I felt safe. Even though I'm locked up with like 6 or 8 other guys, I could breathe for a second, because I did feel safe from me. And I hadn't felt that way in a really long time. And I knew that I was not going to have access to alcohol. And then I noticed him. And I was locked up in a cell with this really, really, how do I say this? He was a really, really obnoxious, abrasive, negative individual that I had known from the bars at that time. And I thought, this is not good. This is not going to be good. But I had been allowed to take a book to jail with me. Back then you could do that. And I had no idea the book was about meditation. So here I am, locked up in a jail cell with 6, 8 guys and one really obnoxious individual. And I start practicing meditation in that jail cell. Had nothing better to do, so I thought, why not? My of course, my grand plan is still suicide. I knew exactly which trees on Fremont Road, which is, 2 miles from here. I knew which trees I'm going to plow my vehicle into at 100 miles an hour. And I'm practicing this meditation, and I'm locked up with this real obnoxious guy. And I'm thinking, this isn't going to be good, but I'm going to just keep practicing this. And Sunday night, they startled me a little bit. They rattle your cage and they say, "Hey, does anybody want to go to an AA meeting?" And that kind of froze me in my tracks, because it suddenly hits me that I used to drink for years and years and years with the guy that I knew chaired those AA meetings in the jail. And as a matter of fact, I drank for years and years and years with his son too. And I thought, I don't know why I thought this, but I thought, I can't go to that meeting. He knows everything about me. I don't even know why I thought that, but that's what I thought. And so I didn't go. But that really obnoxious guy in my jail cell, he went to that AA meeting. So I'm laying in my cell practicing meditation. He's at AA. He comes back to the cell, and I'm listening to him. And he's talking to the other guys in the cell. He's trying to help these guys. And his whole attitude and outlook changed. His whole demeanor changed. His voice actually changed. And I'm thinking, my God, what did they do to him down there? They brainwashed this guy. And my very next thought was, oh, hey, Reg, that's exactly what you need, man. You need a good old-fashioned brainwashing, because all you have is stinking thinking, dude. You're thinking about suicide, So I thought, I'm thinking, I'm listening to this guy. I'm thinking, man, maybe I do need to go down to that AA meeting. That sounded pretty good. And I'm listening to him, and I'm starting to read the big book now a little bit, as well as meditate, and talking to this guy. And I'm getting really interested. And the next Sunday they ask, hey, anybody want to go to an AA meeting? And I can't wait. I go down there, and the guy that I know has chaired that meeting for years and years isn't there. So there's my Abby. They sent Ricky Lee Mathis is sitting there. And again, this is the biggest, meanest, roughest, gruffest character I've ever seen in my life. And I'm thinking, whoa, what's going on here? And the first thing he says to me is, I don't give a rip whether you get anything out of this or not. I'm here to save my own butt because I can't keep what I have, unless I give it away. And right away, I'm like, cool. This guy's not trying to sell me nothing. He is not trying to shove anything down my throat. And so I didn't have that whole experience Bill had where it was like, I've got religion. That's not what I experienced. This individual started sharing with me how he felt, how he acted, and how he drank. And it was the first time I ever heard anyone talk about those things in the same manner that was identical to me. And it was the first time I ever identified with another alcoholic. And that was the exact same as me. And I thought, my God, there's another Rege Rupp roaming the face of the universe. And not only is there one roaming the face of the universe, but he's sober. He was my Abby Thatcher. And I was shocked. I couldn't believe it. I just could not believe it. I thought, maybe, just maybe, if this guy's sober, maybe I can get sober. And it was the first time I had any hope that that was even possible. And I asked him, I said, man, I know you're like me. Said, how in the world do you stay sober? Because he had been sober at this time probably 6 or 8 months. He's fresh out of prison. He was clearly comfortable in his own skin. He didn't give a rip whether I liked what he had to say or not. And I'm sold. I'm just like, wow, this is what I've been looking for my whole life. He's talking about the big book. He's got a book in his hands. He's reading from it. He's telling me about the program. And he looks me right in the eyes and he told me any damn fool can stay sober for one day. And I'd heard that 100 times and I thought, well, what a crock, every time I heard that. But when he looks you in the eyes and he tells you that, I'm telling you, it hit the depths of my soul. He's told me, Reggie, he said, every single morning when I wake up, when my eyes pop open, if I don't ask God for help, I've already made up my mind. I'm going to drink that day. I'm a real alcoholic. He said, if I don't get to a meeting, if I don't try to help another alcoholic that day, all bets are off. He said, good chance I'm going to drink that day, And he said, if I don't thank God, he said, I've got to remain humble. I got to realize I can't do this thing. If I don't thank God at the end of every day for another day of sobriety, you know what? Good chance I'm going to drink again. And, he gave me a secret formula that really works, and he pointed me to the book and, which is probably where I should get back to and read on and Bill's story, since that's what I'm supposed to really be reading here and relating to. And then I so relate to this, though, because my Abby Thatcher, man, he died. Unfortunately, he relapsed later on, years down the road, and he passed away. But he saved my life. If he wouldn't have been there that day, if God wouldn't have sent just the right person to just the right place at just the right time, you'd have a different speaker today. Because I would have committed suicide. That's where I was at. But God knew exactly who I needed, when I needed him, and how I needed him to be there. Just like Bill needed Abby, I needed Ricky Lee Mathis. So Bill goes on to talk about it, says, but my friend sat before me and he made the point blank declaration that God had done for him what he could not do for himself. Boy, did I hear that one. It says his human will had failed. Doctors had pronounced him incurable. Society was about to lock him up like
Am I the only one experiencing a blank? I think Reggie had mentioned that he had an ice storm earlier in the day, and he didn't have any power or internet connection at his place. So let's just hold on. He's logged in from his mobile. Because
There you go. Yeah, unmute yourself, Reg.
Okay. Sorry, I lost my signal there. My back?
welcome back.
Yep.
Okay. So anyhow, had the power originated in him? Obviously it had not. There had been no power in him, or no more power in him than there was in me in that moment. And this was none at all. That floored me. It began to look as though religious people were right after all. Here was something at work in the human heart that had been done, which had done the impossible. My ideas about miracles were drastically revised right then. Never mind the musty past. Here sat a miracle directly across the kitchen table. For me, it was across the jail table. He shouted great tidings. I saw that my friend was much more than inwardly reorganized. He was on a different footing. His roots grasped a new soil. Despite the living example of my friend, there remained in me the vestiges of my old prejudice. The word God still aroused a certain antipathy. When the thought was expressed that there might be a God personal to me, this feeling was intensified. I didn't like the idea. I could go for such conceptions as creative intelligence, universal mind, or spirit of nature, but I resisted the thought of Czar of the heavens, however loving his way may be. I have since talked with scores of men who felt the same way. My friend suggested what seemed a novel idea. He said, why don't you choose your own conception of God? And that was a huge one for me too. And I'm sure it is for so many of us who first come to this program. And for me, I always believed in God, and I had been praying to God for years and years, asking him to help me, with this whole drinking thing. And I didn't think I thought I'd done something so horribly bad that he didn't want anything to do with me. And I'd watched my older brothers I thought all my older brothers, drank and drugged just as hard as I did. And I watched them all, their lives all changed, all wound up somehow developing a relationship with God in church, and they wound up raising families, having great lives. And I was still floundering in my alcoholism. So I thought, man, I must have really done something wrong. God, I prayed and prayed and prayed. And I'm like, God, what about me? I'm dying here. And it just wasn't happening for me. So I really started wondering. But it says that statement hit me hard. It melted the icy intellectual mountain in whose shadow I had lived and shivered many years. I stood in the sunlight at last. It was only a matter of being willing to believe in a power greater than myself. Nothing more was required of me to make my beginning. I saw that growth could start from that point, upon a foundation of complete willingness. I might build what I saw in my friend. Would I have it? Of course I would. Thus was I convinced that God is concerned with us humans when we want him enough. As long as I saw, I felt, I believed. Or at long last, I saw, I felt, I believed. Scales of pride and prejudice fell from my eyes. A new world came into view. The real significance of my experience in the cathedral burst upon me. For a brief moment, I had needed and wanted God. There had been a humble willingness to have him with me, and he came. But soon the sense of his presence had blotted out by worldly clamors, mostly those within myself. And so it had been ever since. How blind I had been. At the hospital, I was separated from alcohol for the last time. Treatment seemed wise, for I showed signs of delirium tremens. There I humbly offered myself to God as I then understood him, to do with me as he would. I placed myself unreservedly under his care and direction. I admitted for the first time that of myself I was nothing, that without him I was lost. I ruthless. And this is basically step 3. On here? Did I lose you? Oh, no, I am still on. Okay. I thought I might have lost my signal again. And basically this is step 3, which I did in that jail cell, and started doing step 4, which Bill is getting into now. It says I ruthlessly faced my sins and became willing to have my newfound friend take them away root and branch. I have not had a drink since, and that is true for me too. I've not had a drink since that first meeting in Branch County Jail in January of 1992, and for that I'm deeply grateful. So it says my schoolmate visited me. I fully acquainted him with my problems and deficiencies. So here Bill's taking step 5. I later did that with my sponsor, a gentleman by the name of Daryl Sensat, who passed away during the pandemic here, unfortunately. Says we made a list of people I had hurt or toward whom I felt resentment. Step 8, it says I expressed my entire willingness to approach these individuals, admitted my wrong. Never was I to be critical of them. I was to write all such matters to the utmost of my ability, which is step 9. It says I was to test my thinking by the new God consciousness within. Common sense would thus become uncommon sense. And again, that's kind of referring back to that whole psychic change. And step 10, and I was to sit quietly when in doubt. Step 11, asking only for decision and strength to meet my problems as he would have me. Never was I to pray for myself except as my request forward to my usefulness for others. Then then only might I expect to receive, but that would be in great measure. My friend promised when these things were done, I would enter upon a new relationship with my Creator, which is step 12, and I would have the elements of a way of living which answered all my problems. Belief in the power of God, plus enough willingness, honesty, and humility to establish and maintain the new order of things were the essential requirements. Simple but not easy. A price had to be paid. It meant destruction of self-centeredness. I must turn in all things to the Father of light who presides over us. These were revolutionary and drastic proposals, but the moment I fully accepted them, the effect was electric. There was a sense of victory followed by such a peace and serenity as I had ever known. There was utter confidence. I felt lifted up as though the great clean wind of a mountaintop blew through and through. God comes to most men gradually, but his impact on me was sudden and profound. For a moment, I was alarmed and called my friend, the doctor, to ask if I were still sane. He listened and wondered as I talked. Finally, he shook his head, saying, "Something has happened to you I don't understand, but you had better hang on to it. Anything is better than the way you were." The doctor now sees many men who had such experiences. He knows that they are real. While I lay in the hospital and the thought came that there were thousands of hopeless alcoholics who might be glad to have had to have what had been so freely given me. Perhaps I could help some of them. They in turn might work with others. And then my friend had emphasized that the absolute necessity of demonstrating these principles in all my affairs. Particularly was it imperative to work with others as he had worked with me. Faith without works was dead, he said, and how apparently true for the alcoholic. For if an alcoholic failed to perfect and enlarge his spiritual life through the work and self-sacrifice for others, he could not survive the certain trials and low spots ahead. If he did not work, he would surely drink again, and if he drank, he would surely die. Then faith would be dead indeed. With us, it is just that way. My wife and I abandoned ourselves with enthusiasm to the idea of helping other alcoholics to a solution of their problems. It was fortunate for my old business associates remained skeptical for a year and a half, during which I found little work. I was not too well at the time and was plagued by waves of self-pity and resentment. This sometimes nearly drove me back to drink, but I soon found that when all other measures failed, work with another alcoholic would save the day. Many times I have gone to my old hospital in despair. On talking to a man there, I would be amazingly lifted up and set on my feet. It is a design for living that works in rough going. We commenced to make many fast friends, and a fellowship has grown up among us, of which it is a wonderful thing to be a part of. The joy of living we really have, even under pressure and difficulty. I have seen hundreds of families set their feet in the path that really goes somewhere. Have seen the most impossible domestic situations righted, feuds and bitterness of all sorts wiped out. I have seen men come out of asylums and resume a vital place in the lives of their families and communities. Business and professional men have regained their standing. There is scarcely any form of trouble and misery which has not been overcome among us. In one Western city and its environs, there are 1,000 of us in our families. We're almost through this chapter, guys. We meet frequently. I'm sorry? We meet frequently so that newcomers may find the fellowship they seek. At these informal gatherings, one may often see from 50 to 200 people. We are growing in numbers and power. An alcoholic in his cups is an unlovely creature. Our struggles with them are variously strenuous, comic, and tragic. One poor chap committed suicide in my home. He could not or would not see our way of life. There is, however, a vast amount of fun about it all. I suppose some would be shocked by our seeming worldliness and levity. But just underneath there is deadly earnestness. Faith has to work 24 hours a day in and through us, or we perish. Most of us feel we need look no further for utopia. We have found it with us right here and now. Each day, my friend's simple talk in our kitchen multiplies itself in a widening circle of peace on earth and goodwill to men. And I can so relate to the ending of that chapter. My circle of friends is enormous, from that day in Grant County Jail, back in 1992 to today, and just in the pandemic alone, I want to tell you, I lost a gentleman who was a delegate here in Michigan, who was a nighttime babysitter at a treatment center I was in early in recovery. Huge impact in my sobriety. I lost a gentleman by the name of Tim Gartley, who became one of my best friends of sobriety. We were a part of a group called the Recovery Maniacs. Another gentleman who was, if not my best friend, my second best friend, I think my
Reggie, you're muted. Reggie, you're
I'm
muted.
so sorry. I keep losing my. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. So sorry. We had a major ice storm, so little signal here and no internet. It's just crazy. But so sorry about that. But yeah, I've lost 5 of the major men in my life in sobriety just in the pandemic alone. And God has filled those gaps in for me in major ways. And, and one of those recent gaps, the fillings of those gaps is on here. It just amazes me, the people God puts in my life. I recently met Karen, who's on here, and Britt's on here, who I've recently reconnected with, just people that God it seems like everywhere I go, everything I do, God plugs just the right people in just the right place at just the right time. And I never know who it's going to be. So I have to pay attention. I have to really listen. I have to look past the end of my nose, and most of the time for me, what I've really, really learned, not only do I not know who has to say something to me that I really need to pay attention to, whether it's for me or for somebody else in my life, I never know who it is that really needs help, so I ask God every single day to show me, who it is I can help. And if I'm really paying attention, if I look past the end of my nose, it doesn't have to be another alcoholic. It could be my neighbor. My neighbor needed help. Obviously, we have this huge power outage here. We had a major ice storm. My poor neighbor has this generator hooked up, and I didn't know. He was real frustrated. I went over and he kept, popping breakers. So it was just because he was using the wrong extension cords. I said, I got a big one over here. I'll bring it over, and boom, problem solved. Something very simple for me, cost me nothing, made his day. He's happy. It's just something so simple that God put on my heart, an immediate solution, and that's all God wants. God wants his children to help his children. God wants his children to love his children. God wants his children to carry the message to his children that there is hope. I don't care what your problem is. I guarantee you we can find a solution. I can't do it by myself. You can't do it by yourself. But when we get together and we bring God into the equation, I guarantee you we can find a solution. A buddy of mine, one of the guys I got sober with, he got sober 6 months after I did. He recently called me. He had waited till he was dying 1,000 deaths. He was dying inside. He finally called me. He said, Reggie, he said, I've lost 45 pounds. I said, man, I want to get on your diet plan. He said, no. He said, something's wrong. He said, I got blood coming out of places blood shouldn't be coming out of. He said, I've gone to a surgeon. I don't have health insurance. It's going to, I forget how many thousands of dollars. He said, I need help. And so I said, okay, buddy, we're going to help you. But I said, you're going to have to get humble because we're going to ask a lot of people for help. It's not just going to be one or two people. And and he, he's an alcoholic. We don't like to ask for help. But what happened is, before I even talked to him the next time, he called me crying because his boss handed him $3,000. Somebody else handed him money, and he didn't even have to ask. Those are miracles. When people start praying for other people and just the thoughts are out there, you don't know what's going to happen. You never know, and that's stuff that's happening right here, right now. That's Alcoholics Anonymous. I got to share something else with you that just, I'm laying in bed recently, and God's just like he did in that very first, I didn't tell you this part about that first meeting for me, but I had kind of a Bill-like experience there too. When that guy was sharing his story, my whole life was flashing before my eyes. I'm like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. I'm seeing scene after scene after scene. And I'm like, I knew where I'd been. I knew where I was headed. I knew if I continued, if I didn't get what this guy got, if I didn't get the message of Alcoholics Anonymous, if I got lucky, I would live to go where that gentleman just spent the last 20 years. I was going to prison. And the prison that he was in is known as one of the meanest, toughest prisons in the world. It's Jackson State Prison in Michigan is not a pleasant place to be. And I know that this gentleman had been stabbed and shot and all kinds of stuff, and he survived it, and probably because it's so big and mean and ruthless. But I don't think I would have survived that prison. Not as big and mean and ruthless as he was. So, but no, God was there for him. God got him to me. You know, that guy should never survived. I can promise you this, that daily reflection that you read at the beginning of the meeting is a really, really important one to me. And it's one that always reminds me, I do not deserve to be alive. I do not deserve to be sober. I do not deserve to be free. But I'm all of those things. And only because of you, it's only because of God, and only because of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I know I've run my time. I apologize for the internet interruptions, but thank you for allowing me to be here. God bless you. I'm so tickled that Karen showed up. I can't see who else here, but I can see them. That just made my day. So thank you so much.